Hey everyone, I'm EduNeret. If this is your first time and you're watching me on YouTube, welcome to my channel. Go ahead and give me a subscribe if you're able. It really helps my channel growth. And if you're watching on Substack, go ahead and give me a subscribe there too. Over the last few weeks, my channel growth has really surged thanks to my recent interview with my friend and old boss, Tucker Carlson. If you're here on my channel because you saw that interview or you heard about it and you want to watch it, you can check out the link to that video below in the description or by clicking on my channel page. So with all the growth, it got me thinking, what type of content am I going to be creating going forward? I have all these new subscribers, my YouTube channel's now monetized, so I figured I'd like to try something a little new. Now, most of my audience, I assume, is politically conservative like I am, but there are already so many places where you can get your news out there. There's so many voices sitting behind a microphone like I am trying to do, share their opinions. So I don't really want to add to the noise, I want to cut through the noise. I don't want to take up too much of your time either. So I figured the best way to do that is by highlighting a few stories throughout the week that may have gone underreported in the news. I mean, every time I happen to share a news story with a family member or friends, the feedback I always get is, wow, I didn't know that, or why isn't that being reported, or I hadn't seen that. And that's because most Americans are too busy to be plugged into the news every single day like I am. They read the headlines, they get a few minutes here and there, so I'm going to try to fill those gaps each week with news, data, and information that I think is important for you to know about. I'll do my best, like I said, to keep it to the point. Sometimes I'll go a little off script. I'll try not to be too long. And I don't want to make this too overproduced either. That way I can get you the content and news as quickly as possible as it happens, about once a week. So without further ado, let's get into some of the stories this week. First, the devastating wildfires in Los Angeles, California. Now, this is a story that most of you would have heard about by now, I am sure. The images are apocalyptic. It looks like a nuclear bomb has gone off in some of these neighborhoods. But now that it's over, people are starting to ask, how did this happen? And so there are a lot of narratives out there, oh, it was global warming, it was this or it's that. And I figured there are a couple of important facts to share about how we got here. Wildfires have been common in this region for decades, if not longer. But what appears to have made this fire more devastating than others is the gross negligence in the preparation for the disaster, the incompetence of city and state officials in the response, and the state's complete capitulation to environmental zealots over the decades that helped cause this mess. Here are just a few examples. Let's start with preparedness and response. Nearly a week before the fire started ravaging the Pacific Palisades, the National Weather Service issued a warning for strong Santa Ana winds and extreme fire conditions. That was on January 2nd. The next day, there was also a fire weather watch warning that was issued. The day after that, last Saturday, the mayor of Los Angeles, Karen Bass, left the United States to attend the president of Ghana's inauguration. This, again, knowing that her state was under fire warning. On Monday, state and local officials began escalating those warnings. It was on Monday that Bass issued her first warning about the fire on X. She didn't even issue a press release until the following day, when the fire had already broken out in the Palisades. Then, a day later, on Wednesday, Bass finally returned home to a city where over 1,000 homes had already burned down and over 100,000 people had already fled. And this is what she had to say when she was asked about her absence in Ghana during this entire disaster.
Do you owe citizens an apology for being absent while their homes were burning? Do you regret cutting the fire department budget by millions of dollars, Madam Mayor? Have you nothing to say today?
So what was so important about the inauguration in Ghana for her to be there? I mean, honestly, who the fuck goes to Ghana when their city is under a natural disaster warning? And her response in her first official press conference a couple days after that was, well, I took the fastest route back that I could. I came back on a military plane. Who cares, lady? Nobody effing cares. You shouldn't have even been there in the first place. And then to make matters worse, a day into fighting the fire hydrants in the area ran out of water. Yes, in the United States of America, we have fire hydrants that don't have any water in them. And why was there no water? Well, in part, because one of the largest reservoirs in the Pacific Palisades, the Santa Ynez Reservoir, which holds up to 117 million gallons of water if it's full, was offline and empty. It had been closed since last February to undergo repairs. And that's not all. The story goes on. 10 years ago, California voters passed Proposition 1. It authorized $3 billion in spending to increase California's water storage by building new reservoirs. And so 10 years later, do you want to know how many storage facilities have been built? Zero. Zero facilities. California also had record rainfall last year, but 95% of that rainwater was allowed to run into the ocean because government officials were incapable of capturing it, in part because they have no reservoirs and they haven't built any. They've also been blocked by environmental extremists. These aren't people who love the outdoors. These aren't people who spend their times in nature. I guarantee you that the people who run these so-called environmental organizations are urban liberals who don't even spend a few days a year in a national park. They deal in theory. They don't deal in the real world and in nature. They're not conservationists. So these groups like the Sierra Club and others, over the years they've sued to stop the state's water project. The state itself also sued the Trump administration in 2019 when Trump tried to redirect water to Southern California urban areas. And the state sued over concerns that the redirected water would affect the smelt fish, which you can see on your screen right now. So all of this over the smelt fish. I could go on and on and on about this, like the fact, for example, that California Governor Gavin Newsom recently cut the state's fire prevention budget by $100 million, or the fact that Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass cut the city's fire department budget by $17 million, despite repeated warnings that it would affect the department's ability to fight fires. And again, this is coming from a state that already spends $4 billion a year on water. I guess they just can't seem to figure it out with all the regulations and all the incompetence across all levels of that state's government. And then you think about maybe that's in part because they have people like this running things. So meet LA Fire Chief Kristin Crowley. She makes over $400 grand a year. That makes her one of the highest paid public officials that I've ever seen. I mean, that's more than the President of the United States makes. And something that's really important to Kristin Crowley that she wants all of you to know about is the fact that she's a lesbian. Because we all know your sexuality, and being a lesbian really helps people fight fires. It's why you've seen headlines like these: LA lesbian fire chief battles blazes and bigots. Or amid Palisades fire, Los Angeles' first LGBTQ+ fire chief is proving lesbians really know how to get it done. Here's a story from when she took over the department.
I am super inspired.
She took time out of her already busy schedule to tell us about her vision for the department's future, one that includes a 3-year strategic plan to increase diversity.
People ask me, well, what number are you looking for? I say, I'm not looking for a number. It's never enough.
Out of 3,300 city firefighters, only 115 are women right now.
Again, do we care how many diverse firefighters there are in a department? Do you care about the skin color or the sexuality of someone when your house is on fire? Because if you did before, I guarantee you don't care now, especially if you live in this area of California. Maybe, for example, too, another thing, the department shouldn't have been sending fire equipment to Ukraine. They did that 2 years ago. And so this, ladies and gentlemen, is Democrat governance. Of course, no one political party is responsible for any tragedy or act of God, but political parties can be, and in this case should be, held responsible for their responses. The reason this is also infuriating is because it doesn't have to be this way. None of what I just laid out has to do with climate change whatsoever. I mean, imagine you pay the highest taxes in the country. You're one of these wealthy people in Los Angeles. You had a home in the Pacific Palisades as a millionaire. And despite all those taxes, all those property taxes, you can't get water, you can't get enough firefighters, you can't get accountability. And oh, by the way, as Democrats who run government, we'll give free rein to the drug addicts and the criminals while we're at it too. And so in your moment of need, despite all this funding, you get nothing. Look, I certainly sympathize with anyone who's lost their home or who is suffering. But there are a lot of wealthy celebrities who have profited off the state's descent into one-party rule. In fact, most of Hollywood has. They stood by as all of this happened. They criticized anyone who opposed this Democrat takeover of the state. They cheered for it, and many of them funded it personally. And so now many of them are getting the exact government they voted for. And so good luck when it comes to rebuilding those mansions. I mean, it's probably going to take 2 or 3 years to get a permit, and that's how things go in the blue state of California. All right, moving on, there are some Democrats who have apparently realized there is an extreme that goes too far in their party. Several Democrats in Congress are coming out in favor of the Laken Riley Act. That's a new immigration bill named after the slain Georgia student who was brutally killed and violated by a Venezuelan illegal immigrant while she was on a jog just off of campus. So the bill does a couple of things. Number one, it lowers the standard by which Immigration and Customs Enforcement, that's ICE, must detain an illegal immigrant. And so they lowered that standard to things like theft. So number one, I think that's a good thing. If you're an illegal who's going to shoplift or steal in this country, you can get right out. And it's good that we're catching these people on their very first minimal offense. The bill also empowers state attorneys general to sue the federal government if they fail in immigration enforcement, which is basically what we've seen the last few years under Biden. In other words, if you have a president who decides they want to open the border, they want to ignore all the laws, there is a mechanism now by which states can step in and sue. So 48 Democrats voted for this in the House, but over 150 voted against it. Many of them claim that they're worried about due process, but what this really comes down to me, is that they are more concerned about giving legal and judicial rights to people who have committed crimes and who aren't supposed to be here than they are concerned about protecting people they were elected to serve. It's that simple. They prioritize these illegal immigrants over the safety of their own communities. Now, to their credit, some Democrat senators like John Fetterman of Pennsylvania, John Ossoff of Georgia, Ruben Gallego of Arizona, and a few others all came out and said they would vote for this bill. And what's interesting, all of the Democrat senators who came out and said they would vote for the bill come from states that Trump won. And so yes, maybe there are political reasons for these senators that want to get reelected. You know, the Democrats lost badly and nobody wants to be part of a losing team or a losing agenda. But whatever the reason is for their support of this bill, it's a good thing and it's good for the country. Lastly, some tech news. TikTok announced it will be shutting down its operations later this month unless the Supreme Court intervenes to block a bipartisan law that was passed to shut down the platform over concerns that the app is controlled by the Chinese Communist Party. So there had previously been reports that TikTok's parent company called ByteDance would try and sell off TikTok to other owners instead of simply shutting the app down, but it appears not so. And so that tells me one thing. China would rather end TikTok altogether than see it fall into another entity's hands. So it was, in fact, about Chinese influence all along. We were told by people that this is a speech issue or China doesn't really control it. If the Chinese government isn't controlling the app and using it for nefarious purposes, why wouldn't ByteDance just sell off the TikTok asset? And look, I certainly understand the free speech concerns with this, but TikTok isn't the only means by which people can post or share information online. And I haven't really been convinced that it's a net good for society or that another competitor in the market, like Instagram, can't offer the same services. So I'm not opposed to this shutting down. And finally, the last story we have, Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook is in the midst of a right-wing turn. His company's donating to Trump's inauguration. Zuckerberg has been seen at Mar-a-Lago. His company's removing tampons from male bathrooms. I don't know why those were there in the first place. But most importantly, his company Meta has eliminated its content moderation policies. In other words, its policies that were used for censorship and anti-free speech that were disproportionately used to target conservatives. Here's Zuckerberg explaining his decision.
We've reached a point where it's just too many mistakes and too much censorship. The recent elections also feel like a cultural tipping point towards once again prioritizing speech. So we're going to get back to our roots and focus on reducing mistakes, simplifying our policies, and restoring free expression on our platforms.
So Zuckerberg is effectively shutting down woke at Meta. He also just appeared on the Joe Rogan Experience and blasted the Biden White House for having put pressure on Facebook to censor and remove factual posts about vaccines. So many are accusing Zuckerberg of just cozying up to Trump because he sees the way the wind is blowing, he's taking a page out of Elon Musk's playbook and wants the same access and the same friendship with Trump. But so what if he is? I mean, we should allow newcomers, especially powerful ones, to come on board so as long as they're being sincere and so as long as they're operating as promised. I, for one, would rather have Mark Zuckerberg on my side than not, because we've seen what that alternative looks like. Again, censorship at Facebook or him giving hundreds of millions of dollars to Democrats. So I say let's give credit to Zuckerberg where due. If he follows through on these policies, great. There's no loss, nothing lost for us. And if he's lying about it, I'm sure someone will find out and he will be called out for it. All right, that's about it for us. I said I'd keep it short, so that's it for me on this week's news. I'm glad to have given this a go. Let me know what you think about the content in the comments, whether you like it or hate it. We can always change it up. But either way, we'll be back soon. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.